Hello and welcome to another exams update before we start school again in September. This is what I'm going to tell you about in this video. 5 things. What changes did your teachers ask for with GCSEs? Why did they ask for those changes? Then we'll look in detail at the changes for English language and literature, because it's my channel. And then I'll look at the changes to other GCSEs, because let's face it, not everybody loves language and literature. And then finally, what is that going to mean to your grades next year? So this is what your teachers asked for. Now it's important to say that teachers were split. Many, although it's still in the minority, many like me wanted the exams to remain the same. Why? Well, if what we teach is important, then every student needs to know it. If what we teach is just for an exam, then what's the point of any of it? You might as well teach anything. None of it matters by itself. It's just the exam grade that matters. Well, sadly for me, but maybe not for you, most teachers think that what they teach is less important than the exam grade itself. And so they asked for lots of different ways of cutting out the content of what you were tested on. And teachers also had some more profound reasons for asking for these changes. So many teachers, in fact most, thought that there was a problem during lockdown where students with advantages either from income or coming to better schools or having better internet or just being better motivated and harder working. And they were worried therefore that the top grades would always go to the students who already had those advantages, and disadvantaged students would not be able to catch up and get the top grades. Teachers also assumed that students in year 10 won't have learned much during lockdown, and so they were very worried about how much they'd teach from September. Instead of saying, hey, we'll just teach what we'd normally teach from September, they've assumed that year 10s hadn't really learnt much at all, and they're going to have to reteach all that stuff that you should have been studying. That for me is very sad. Year 10s who have fallen behind might just give up in year 11, so they were worried that students would just simply see everything as overwhelming and therefore stop learning. Now I think that's a very depressing view of what our students are like, but you might think, no, my year group's like that, Mr. Salles. Drop me a comment if you agree. Teachers asked for a reduction in the amount of knowledge that you would be tested on in your subjects. In fact, about 76% of teachers wanted that, showing that I'm in a real minority of 24%. The same number also wanted a reduction in the number of exam questions, and many teachers wanted to get rid of exams altogether and just have teacher assessments. And another practical idea that the government has rejected was that the exams should be spread over different months. So you would do a module and then take an exam, and then do another module and then take an exam. And that would reduce the exam pressure. Right, well now you know why the changes were asked for. Let's see what you actually got. So 62% of English teachers wanted the literature papers to change and be reduced. And the result is the only question you must do in your literature questions are the one on your Shakespeare text. As you know, you have 3 other texts: the 19th century novel, the modern text published after 1914, and your poetry. And you will only have to do 2 out of those 3. You will not have to do all 3 of them in the exam, which means your schools won't have to teach you all 3. You can just concentrate on 2 of them. This does throw up 2 questions which we're waiting for clarification on. Firstly, does it mean each student can choose their text? Can you decide to drop the poetry, whereas the person next to you decides to do the poetry and drop the modern text? Do you have that choice? And then finally, if you choose to do the poetry, does that mean only you have to do the unseen poetry? Or does everybody have to do the unseen poetry, whether they do the anthology question or not? So we're waiting to find out. My suspicion is that each student will be able to choose whatever they want to do, and no one will have to do the unseen poetry unless they choose the poetry anthology questions. Now, for English language, there is a spoken assessment which you have to do, but it doesn't actually carry any marks towards your exam. It used to back in the day, but then the government decided it was too easy for teachers to give too high a mark to students. They decided this would lead to grade inflation, or in the worst case, cheating, and said, no, we're not going to take your marks, teachers, we don't trust you. But now they've decided you don't have to do it at all, because when would the skill of being able to speak formally to a small group ever be useful in your life? I mean, how could you possibly need to know that? I'm asking that question, of course, rhetorically, but there you go. You no longer need to be able to speak in a formal and educated way. Because it's all about the exam, it's not about preparing you for a brighter future, where you know stuff that's going to dramatically improve the quality of your life and your employability. Okay, I've calmed down now. The exam timetable for next summer might extend from May to July instead of May to June, and this will give schools more flexibility in case there are further lockdowns. The government is going to make a decision, and who knows when we'll find out. There are changes to your other GCSEs as well. So in geography, you no longer have to do the fieldwork, and the questions in the exam that are based on the fieldwork are now not compulsory. In ancient history, teachers now have the choice of content. They'll be able to drop some units, and similarly with history, schools will be able to drop some units. That means that you probably won't have a choice as a student as to which units you answer in the exam, because there will be some units your teachers won't teach you. In theory, of course, you could just study a unit yourself and do that one in the exam. I'm not recommending that, by the way, but some people might have a genuine passion for an area of history that their school ditches, and you'll be able to say, well, I'm going to try and answer on that. Art and design, there won't be a practical exam now here. You'll just be assessed on a portfolio of all your work. And design and technology will no longer have to make a prototype. You will just be able to show what your prototype might have looked like. And in PE, you will no longer need to be brilliant at 3 different kinds of sporting activities. You can now just be brilliant at 2 of them. Now, does that strike you as odd? I mean, the main benefit of doing PE is that you get to do lots of practical activities, which after all you can continue for the rest of your life until you're 80. But no, it's much more important what you write in the exam. The world, well, not the world, it's just GCSEs have gone bananas. Now, in drama, dance and music, there are lots of intricate little changes. I'll put a link in the description below so that you can get the actual Ofqual paper. But basically for all 3 of those subjects, your performances can now be solo instead of in a group. That actually makes sense because there is a greater opportunity of passing COVID on if you're rehearsing in a group. And your performances only need to be 1.5 minutes long if they're solo, or 2 minutes long if they're in a group. I don't know how much of a change that is from the real thing, but if you can pass a GCSE by being able to perform brilliantly for only 2 minutes, is that really qualification that actually trains you to be good in your subject? Again, I'm losing my mind. In science, there is no longer a need for you to do the required practical on your own. Schools can now deliver the practical content by demonstration, but equally many schools might say, no, we want our students to be great scientists, they're going to do the required practicals. So you'll have to wait and see what your school is doing. And I'm very sorry about the gender bias of my photo here. That's the internet for you. You will be interested to know that 70% of new people training to be a doctor are in fact female, and the gender bias in science is disappearing. In languages, the formal spoken language assessment is now not going to happen. Teachers will assess you informally during the course of your lessons, so you won't lose teaching time. And exam boards are going to be able to give you an additional option question in the writing paper, which means if you don't know one topic that turns up, there'll be more alternatives, hopefully, which you do know, and therefore you can perform better in the exam. And they're going to remove the requirements for assessments to use words outside of vocabulary lists, so you don't need to know as many words, because why would that be useful? And great news for mathematicians like my son. Maths is now officially the most important subject in the curriculum because there are no changes to any part of the exam. You need to know everything. Here are the other subjects where there are no changes. Pause the screen if you're interested. And so, Mr. Salles, what will this actually mean for my grades next year? Well, it's not what you know in the exam that gets your mark. No, unfortunately, it is just the rank order you come in. It's how many marks you get compared to the next person. So what will that mean? It means your grade that you will get in the exam is exactly the same as if there had been no changes at all. In other words, those students who had the advantages of internet and a supportive family and space to learn, and who were also more motivated and harder working and spent the summer doing the work, or even going beyond that and doing their own studies because they were interested, well, those students will still get the highest grades. In other words, all these changes to the exams are largely pointless. We could say there is one benefit, that you get less work to do, so there's less stress, but it also means that everyone will know less than if the exams were unchanged. So even those students who have worked really hard won't need to retain that knowledge, their schools won't keep testing them on it, and so they'll forget all that stuff, and therefore you will get the grades by knowing less, and every single student in the country will know less than they would have done in the other system. So it's up to you to decide whether that's an advantage to you or not, but it means you'll get exactly the same grades that you would have got before. We could even argue that those students who have been highly motivated and have worked really hard are now going to be disadvantaged because obviously their future learning is affected, particularly say if you do something like a language and you've learnt all this extra vocabulary and now it's not being taught in class, you'll forget it. And so you'll be less good at the language than you should have been because of the decision of the exam boards. But only 24% of teachers agree with me. It will be really interesting to see how many students agree with me. I suspect I'm still in the tiny minority. The one good thing to come out of this is the potential for reduced stress because you have less to learn, and I'll just keep my fingers crossed that that materialises. If the exam system upsets you as it upsets me, check out this video appearing on the left, and you might even want to write to your Member of Parliament because your voice does make a difference. There are nearly 60,000 of you and only one of me. See you soon on my channel.